Okay, I don't get a lot of gifted questions, and there's a reason. All right, I'm going to go ahead and let you know though, because it's a rare. Well, let me get into the question. Do gifted children have any right to be challenged appropriately and receive services if not advancing? Okay, let's tackle that. It depends on the state you live in. All right. Um, Gifted is considered an exceptionality, and in fact, it is included in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So the IDEA does cover and recognize gifted. Okay? Now, depending on the state you live in, there you go. Nothing. All right? So let's say Alabama. Let's take Alabama, for example. So you're going to have to check your state regulations on this. And I'm going to do a comparative between Alabama and New Mexico. Okay, Alabama has gifted. There's a little bit of funds that is sprinkled down from Washington and from the state to support gifted programs. It's not enough, pales in comparison, very little. And there is a right now we have a void of gifted teachers. We don't have enough of them. All right, so schools try to maintain gifted programs, but doing so remains difficult, even though it's considered part of the IDEA, to where there are provisions and rights within it. It just doesn't work the same way as children identified with an IEP. Okay, so kids with an IEP that are covered under one of the 13 recognized categories in Alabama and most of the other states, they have rights to disagree, to go to due process, things of that nature. Now, under gifted, no. Yeah, like you don't have a right to go get somebody like me. You don't have the same rights to due process. Yes, you have rights, and if you want to read about them, if you're in Alabama or in other states, you just go to your state regulations, and it's usually tucked at the very end. The little couple paragraphs about gifted, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Now, in some states, let's go to New Mexico. I think I had New Mexico on this side. New Mexico does recognize gifted as one of the disability categories, as one of the exceptionalities, I guess I could say. So in New Mexico, you would be able to get an IEP, and therefore you would have rights and considerations much different than you would comparatively to Alabama. And in your situation, if your child hasn't progressed in 7 months in reading, I can tell you that even on an IEP standard, that wouldn't be a cause of concern yet. Why? Because IEPs run for whatever the duration dates on the IEP, and usually that's a calendar year or a school year. And a school has that amount of time in order to show tangible, measurable progress. And depending on the hearing officer, being a grade level behind or not making sufficient progress in a given year isn't necessarily considered a denial of FAPE or a denial of a free and appropriate public education. It really does depend. Stagnation is a concern and regression is a concern. The stagnation is a concern depending on the length of time, and that is depending on how it's argued and in the eyes of whatever hearing officer is listening to it. Some may not think that 7 months is stagnation. Some of this stuff is it's not an exact science, guys, and it's not black and white, this law. A lot of nooks and crannies and a heck of a lot of flexibility, mental flexibility, and relying upon somebody else's definitions, because the law just doesn't define that stuff. Why? Because even though we have the law mandating this stuff, so much of this is within the purview of the education system, because the education system's considered the experts in this area. So at that point, that's where there's just not a lot of black and white. Most of this stuff is grays. At the end of the day, you need to check your regulations for gifted in the state that you live in.